This is the Wizard Podcast, episode 16 with Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is March 7th, 2020. I was just in the garage working on a sculpture, and on the weekends, I'm here working on art. I have my little girls, and I've learned with them what I do on the weekend. Their lives are so structured during the week. We put our children in these boxes and we expect them all to behave the same. And I just don't think it's the best way to teach children. I think it's a way to teach a lot of children together, but to put a bunch of kids in the same environment and expect them all to behave in a very similar manner is not very realistic. We do have unique attributes, and we have unique genetics and unique purposes and unique skills, and I think a lot of times we squish the voices, the natural behaviors of children that are actually gifts or assets rather than things that we should punish or diminish. Every week I get a child in private practice who's being labeled ADD or ADHD by the school, and just because they're acting out or they're not on task, more often than not, it turns out they're highly intelligent children that are very creative, and their minds are going different places. And if they're left to be bored or they're not engaged, their minds are going to go different places. And that's something I can really relate to. Growing up, I've mentioned this before in this podcast, but I never thought of myself as I never was a standout student. I pretty much decided early on in school that school wasn't a very important thing to me and that I was just going to work. And I was okay with that. It wasn't even something that I felt bad about. That was something I actually felt proud about. I was proud of the hardworking roots that I came from in Minnesota. So, I think that going back to the schools, before I get too far off on a tangent, something I notice in my own experience is that during those early times, never were my curiosities or behaviors considered something to be curious about or interested in, and to say, I wonder if he's bored. I wonder if there's something going on at home. I wonder what's happening. It was always simply, Mark, 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 that kind of barking at kids that we do in school. And I'm only sharing that. I'm not sharing that to whine about my history. I'm sharing that because what I notice with children is if you really are curious about where their mind is taking them, and you're curious about their idiosyncrasies and their unique skills and habits and their unique voice, you allow them to naturally be fully honest with who they are. I'm not saying don't set guidelines. Of course, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we do provide healthy guidelines, healthy boundaries, healthy feedback, if we follow them, we're curious about them, they more or less lead themselves. That's what Montessori schools are about. It's about kids following their curiosity. So the point of bringing that up was that on this weekend, I'm working on a sculpture, and the girls, I just kind of let them go. I make sure everything's safe, batten down the hatches and all that stuff. But basically just kind of create an environment where they can play and they can create and they can just kind of be. And it's away from that structure of the week. And I figure they have enough structure, so why not just kind of let them be curious and let them take them. And sometimes I need to bring them back to a center. Sometimes I have to intervene. But what's very fascinating is when I'm not involved, there's far less conflict. Something about the parental involvement or the control or just vying for the attention of a parent really changes the dynamic. So this morning, they went for about 3 hours just playing and creating and having a blast, and barely argued. And if they did, they just worked through it. They talked through it. So all that to lead up to what I really wanted to share today, because it was just in my mind while I was working on the sculpture, was experiences that I've had using art as this medium to connect, and really just simply how Over the past few years, I think a lot of us, again, I don't have any desire to go down a political path unless it's necessary. But people all around, I think it's the internet has become a much bigger thing. More specifically, social media has become a bigger thing. Misinformation is everywhere. Uh, we're allowing our truth, we're allowing our minds to sort of be co-opted by a lot of ideas that are not in our best interest. And so we kind of get lost in that. And I noticed that in 3-4 years ago, the election of 2016, that was such a big surprise for everybody. I initially did the thing that I see everybody doing, which is projecting outward, suggesting that people's perspective might be wrong or different in some ways, and really coming from this sanctimonious perspective. It was a big learning experience for me because pretty quickly I started looking inward. I realized that looking, kind of observing, I'm really curious about other people. So observing people and how they adhere to their perspective and how they fight for their perspective and how it affects another human being when you try to force your perspective on them. Or if you call them stupid and you suggest that their perspective is not as correct as your perspective, that's never going to work to inspire someone. That's never going to work to correct someone. If you really take that to the nth degree, what that really is that's kind of an authoritarian point of view, to assume your perspective is righter than someone else's and to say, I am going to impose this on you and you should follow this, or I'm going to call you stupid, or I'm going to say there's something wrong with you, or you're living your life in the wrong way. You're part of the other. People do that on both sides. It's just a very sad mistake that people make. Rather than understanding that we all have these unique points of view and that we should embrace those unique points of view, that makes us stronger to have unique points of view, to have differing perspectives, differing backgrounds, differing cultures. And as long as that factor of harm is not getting involved, there's a lot to be learned from each other. There's a lot to be learned by being curious about one another. And really the point I want to make about all that is I just noticed how separation happens, how we separate ourselves by attaching ideas to perspectives. And really it's about associating danger with ideas or danger with beliefs. That's really how we start to truly separate ourselves, as we start to experience the feeling or the sensation of danger in our body, and we interpret it with certain words, and we attach those words to certain perspectives and certain groups of people. So all of a sudden an idea or a person or the way someone says something has the ability to trigger your deepest emotional response. Well, of course you're going to fight for the survival of that idea, whether it's correct or not. You've become so attached to it. Your identity has become so attached to it. In fact, your perspective of your place in life has become so attached to it that you'll now fight for it. You will fight for it in a way that diminishes the other and makes your point of view correct, even if it is not. So what I did a few years ago, 4 years ago, I guess, start to really dive deep down the rabbit hole of my own perspective, and my perspective in my body, my perspective in my mind, my perspective historically, looking at how I respond to the world from an emotional, physical, psychological, political, spiritual point of view, just looking at these different layers of being, these different layers of existence, and understanding how I interpret and respond to the world automatically in the moment, and how that forms the way that I see. So I started really unraveling a lot of attachments and a lot of perspectives that got in the way of seeing the world honestly and clearly, and perhaps flipping that around, seeing myself honestly and clearly. So by looking inward, what I learned was to see the divine in all people, to understand that we are all connected in a profoundly meaningful way. That beneath the noise, beneath the ideas, beneath the ego, beneath the attachments, beneath the stories that we've all been telling ourselves for centuries, beneath the story of separation is a common connection rooted in love, rooted in spirit, rooted in the fact that we're all floating around on this rock in infinite space. So I guess you could say my perspective was pretty profoundly changed by looking within. And I realized that there are things in this life that create separation. That the human story is really a story of injury and separation. I'm always profoundly moved, and I am fascinated that when you remove the layers of injury, when you help people to navigate the pain in their body and the pain in their mind and the story they've been telling themselves, and you help them learn to let go of the immediate response in the moment and the immediate need to react to the physical responses in the body with a sort of defensiveness, basically taking the physical responses in the body and the automatic thoughts in the mind as truth and assuming everyone else must be wrong, rather than realizing the physical responses in the body are the survival mechanisms of the body responding in conjunction with ideas, with thoughts, with beliefs. And because we attach ourselves to ideas and thoughts and beliefs, we start to have physiological responses. We have a pulse in our body, and that pulse says, oh, that's that feeling, and that feeling means this, and we put this in that category, and we attach this label, and with, a few hundred milliseconds, we've decided someone is bad or wrong, or they're stupid, or they're part of the other. We've had a pulse in our body. It's an automatic response to something we have learned. It goes right into our survival mechanisms, and now we're responding. We're literally creating separation in the moment. We're creating our reality in the moment by the way we respond to the present moment. So, weaving a few different thoughts and ideas together, what I decided a few years ago was, if you really want to help people, if you really want to move people, if you really want to inspire people, if you really want to connect people, you can't force your ideas on them at all. You have to do the opposite. You have to allow them to be. In fact, you have to love them through it and be curious about it. You have to do the opposite of that separation thing in the moment. If your body and mind are telling you to oppose and reject and defend, if you can become aware of that and recognize perhaps that's not the best response, perhaps it's not a very smart response, perhaps it's not an accurate response. If you want to be accurate, perhaps look within and understand, is the way that my body is responding in the moment, is it accurate? Is it correct? Is it right? Is it helpful? Is it useful? No, it's creating separation. And what I mean by separation is conflict, a sense of self and other, a sense that there is the other and that the other is bad and I am correct. The sanctimony, self-righteousness. I have found the right answer, and if other people don't follow it, they are wrong, they are bad. How many people have been slaughtered throughout history because of that kind of thinking? So weaving this in another way, I think the fundamental human injury is separation. And going back to a previous thought, what's amazing is when you heal, when you help people heal, when you help people look through things, when you help people look through the trauma, no one says, all right, now I want to be evil, now I want to be negative, now I want to be bad. Now that you've helped me heal through my pain, now that you've helped me see the story I've been telling myself, what's underneath all that is, I just want to be mean. No, typically people say, I just want to be, I just want to love, I just want to create, I just want to explore. Part of the dyad of that discovery is recognizing deep down in the shadow, deep down beneath the veil in the unconscious, it's not so much darkness, it's not so much evil, negativity. Once you get beneath there and you're willing to go into that space, once you're willing to bucket out the water and look at the wild man beneath the water, as Robert Bly would say, what you find is strength. What you find is this wild part of you that has inspiration and strength and vitality. And you find this part of you that wants to love and wants to connect. It can be at once strong. In fact, it's stronger because of the clarity of self, the clarity of perspective, the clarity of having looked deeply within. It can be strong and kind at the same time. It can be strong and loving at the same time. It can create and connect and protect where needed. So going back to that, so I started with that. When you help people heal, what's beneath it is a sense of love and connection and strength and honesty. Going back to the fundamental injury that we experience as children, at some point very early in childhood, we learn that the responses of our body and mind are incorrect. We're shamed for it. We're punished for it. We hear loud voices telling us to stop. Those loud voices we feel in our body. I see it if I raise my voice to my daughters. I see how their body responds. It responds with a pulse. You have to be very careful with that, because they shut themselves down very quickly. Shut the body down very quickly. Shut the mind down very quickly. Start being very careful about what they say and how they say it, what they do and how they do it. And I'm not just talking about my daughters. I'm talking about children. I'm talking about all of us, our journey. Rather than looking at a child and saying, hey, let's be curious about the responses you're having in your body. Let's be curious about what's going on in your mind. What are you curious about? Rather than punishing their curiosity, rather than punishing the natural responses of their body, help them to listen to the body, help them to listen to the mind, to observe it without judgment, to not even place that injury on it necessarily, and to see it for what it is. It's a source of wisdom. Our body has wisdom. Our body has senses and impulses and responses because it's a source of information. We start labeling it as wrong. Our parents say, that's bad, put it away. Bad thought, bad feeling. Ironically, if you do with those children, what I was describing earlier, really what you can do in relationships across the cultural span, is to allow them to be curious about them, to honor their perspective, to set boundaries where necessary, to show them strength and love and openness at the same time. So that fundamental human injury is that we start hiding our shame, we start hiding our fear, we start hiding our natural self behind a mask, behind an illusion, behind a cover. Quite simply, we start to hide. Through injury, we start to hide. Through injury, we become separated. We become separated within from ourself. We become separated outside from the other. I don't believe that there is separation between people. We set boundaries where necessary, where people lack consciousness or conscientiousness. In other words, if they're behaving in an unconscious way that is harmful to you or others around you, you definitely need to set boundaries with them. Clear boundaries. You need to stand your ground, know your truth, and that's where those boundaries go. But people that tend to be conscientious or conscious, living from that place, they know their boundaries, they know their strength, they know their space, so to speak, and there isn't such a need to set rigid boundaries because of that conscientiousness, that awareness. People are going to set boundaries for themselves. They're going to meet you where you're at. Being conscious or conscientious, meeting people where they are at. and being curious about that rather than looking at someone with a sanctimonious perspective. In other words, looking down at someone and saying, I got something to teach this guy. I got something to teach these people. I know more than them. Maybe just looking at them and meeting them where they are, and completely just being in that present space with them, allowing them to be. It's pretty cool when you have two people that allow each other to be, that just allow each other to be who they are in the present moment, and they're curious about each other and accepting of each other. So that's pretty cool. But going back to this fundamental injury, we become separated very early. We have a separation in our psyche, in our mind. At the root of that, if you just want to be more literal, it's like we start to compartmentalize our neurological processes and networks. We start to create separation in how we think. What happens is we say, these thoughts are good and these thoughts are bad. These feelings are good and these feelings are bad. If we have a feeling in our body that we've been told is bad, or we interpret as bad, we put it in the bad category, we attach a bad label, a negative label, we categorize it. Our mind, in the form of memory, through neurological substrates, I'm just trying to be accurate about it, but we compartmentalize things. We say, this is bad, this is negative, this is scary, this is wrong, I'm going to put it in the rubbish pile. And the negative side, if I have a feeling in my body that reminds me of that label, now I'm going to interpret that feeling as wrong. I'm going to interpret it as bad. I'm going to put it in the bad pile. Therefore, I'm going to invalidate myself in the moment. I'm going to perpetuate the separation. And now I'm acting out ideas and attaching them to emotions. And I'm perpetuating a narrative and a reality that's actually an illusion. And likewise, we can have thoughts in our mind. We have fantasies, we have ideas. And how many of us have been told that our fantasies and our ideas are bad? They're sinful, they're wrong. Certain thoughts you need to push away. Certain thoughts you need to put way back in your mind. Certain thoughts you need to push way down beneath the surface, into the murky waters. Those wild parts of you, those scary parts of you, those lustful parts of you. As a child, we learn to push all that way down and to create an acceptable self in whatever environment we are in. Everybody, to an extent, does that, unless you have super wise, conscientious parents. And I'm not blaming any parent figures. I'm a parent who is flawed and working on it. And I hope that we're all just flawed and working on it. So we can have impulses in our body that tell our mind something's bad or wrong, and we put it in the bad category and we act it out accordingly. We can have thoughts in our mind, visions in our mind that we decide are bad. We associate them with sensations in our body. We start telling a story. We start creating that story. We start creating that story of separation. What's the story of God and man? Separation. We have separated ourselves from God. God, the truth, the Logos, comes back in the flesh and connects us back. There's a healing, there's a truth, there's a bridge, there's a pathway back. And I'm taking my time with this because it's just so damn important. So we start fracturing ourselves very early in our life. We start fracturing our mind, fracturing our psyche. We have an acceptable self, a private self, and a public self, depending upon your experiences. If you've been severely punished, if you've been severely abused or abused, if your thoughts, feelings have been assaulted, if your body has been assaulted, we start to create compartmentalized selves for survival. What do we do as children? We have to survive. We have to warp our minds and bodies to the environment that we're in. And those adaptations protect us as children. The separation protects us. Unfortunately, it protects us. But then we carry it forward because it becomes the medium by which we create our reality by interpreting our thoughts and our feelings with ideas and attachments rather than just experiencing them for what they are. And we just start creating quite a story in our life. And some people start unraveling that story, and they start, sometimes that depression you feel, sometimes that anxiety you feel, well, I would say every time, those emotions you feel, they're sources of wisdom because they're telling you how you perceive the present moment. If you learn to listen to the feelings associated, the sensations associated with depression and anxiety, or any of those labels, what they're really telling you is how your mind and body responds to the present moment based on the story you have been telling yourselves your whole life that started in separation. So we're separated within. This is what a lot of people would call the shadow self or the unconscious. In other words, there's a lot of you that you're not aware of, or a lot of you that you're not willing to be aware of. You don't want to be aware of certain thoughts and feelings and memories. Of course, we push them out of awareness to survive. We push them out of awareness to survive, even really good parts of ourselves. Wild parts, sexy parts, strong parts, creative parts. I didn't start practicing art until I was 20, and I've been practicing art now for 23 years, I suppose. And I didn't do that because growing up, it just wasn't something that was part of the equation. I probably turned it off real early. We all turn parts of ourselves off real early. So this separation inside of us turns into a separation outside of us. If we're going to deny our own reality within, well, then we have to deny the reality of others without. Because for us to acknowledge their reality fully would mean we would have to take a full look within at ourselves. We would have to ask ourselves if our body and our mind is actually correct. Are the ideas we have attached ourselves to actually correct? Well, what if they're not? Oh no, we might be wrong. Oh no, we might not be a big, strong boy. Oh no, we might not be in charge. It takes a lot of strength to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself if the way you're seeing the world is correct or accurate. So that story unfolds, and that story becomes separation in families and communities and in culture. This thing we're seeing politically in our culture, and it's the story, it's an endless story. It's a story of injury. It's a story of separation. We have forgotten the common connection among us all. We've forgotten how to be. We've attached our minds to so many ideas, so many rules, so many rituals, so many fears, that we've forgotten that we made them all up. We've forgotten that we made them all up, and that beneath it all, this is the beauty of that healing process. This is the beauty of looking within. This is the beauty of taking a good look in the mirror and being willing to look at the sensations of your body and the story of your mind as a source of wisdom. To start looking within that story and to start fully accepting it, fully acknowledging it. It's quite a fascinating journey if you're willing to do it, actually. The painting on the wall, I started referencing this that last week. That story, I'll talk more about it if we get time today, but that's really a story of separation. That's what happens when that was commissioned by a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. I'm not going to go into detail about his background. But it was really about going to war, becoming separated, coming home and trying to connect again. How do you come home and connect when you're so disconnected and just jointed inside? How do you connect to a society that doesn't make sense anymore, that's already separated? So this painting on the wall is called The Long Walk Home, and it was commissioned in 2007 or 8, 2009 rather, sorry. It was really one of the first experiences I had working with veterans. It was one of the first experiences I had becoming very acutely aware of how trauma shapes the world. It was really back then that I decided to start focusing on trauma, both as a psychologist and as an artist. And it was really back then that I started realizing maybe the only path to healing as a culture, the only path to healing within the self, the only path to healing and working through these divisions that we have is going to be by looking within, by taking full responsibility of yourself, by being completely honest with yourself. These are not my words. These are the words of many wise people that have come before me. The most recent who speaks that way is Jordan Peterson. Take responsibility and tell the truth. Take a good look in the mirror. Clean yourself up. Start looking in your story. Start understanding your story through different lenses. Look at it through the lens of injury, through the lens of trauma, through the lens of emotion, through the lens of spirit, through the lens of family history, through the lens of ideas. Start to see the mythological story, these various parts that you're playing, these various mythologies that you're playing out, the relationships that you have. Start looking deep beneath the surface of the water. Water is oftentimes a metaphor for the unconscious. Start scooping out the pond, and where I'm getting that from is a book I'm reading right now called Iron John by Robert Bly. I was turned on to it by my friend Justin Carlisle. He's the one I do the Warrior and the Wizard podcast with him occasionally. So the metaphor in the mythology is you start scooping out the pond, and beneath the pond is this wild man. But this wild man is not a bad man. He's not an evil man. He's like a pure man. And in this case, the mythology is a man, but let's not get caught up in that. We all have this place beneath the surface. We all have this place beneath the surface. And discovering that place is where true freedom comes from. It's where true healing comes from. I started down this path today because I had this initial thought that began when I was working on the sculpture earlier. And that was simply that I've gotten to use art as this medium for bringing people together and as a medium for helping mostly veterans work through their story. In some ways, art was like this, for me, this unconscious or intuitive thing that allowed me to discover a lot of what I'm talking to you about. Art has been this great medium for discovery for me. Art has been this great medium for expressing parts of myself that I don't understand, parts of my mind that I don't understand, for dipping beneath the surface of the water and looking for that wild man, looking for that true self, looking for that part of myself that I lost because of that initial injury, that initial separation. And again, I'll be clear for anyone that's not hearing that part. I'm not blaming any parents. We're all parents. We're all kids. We're all part of a community. We're all part of the same interconnected thing. But just by being in the world, we're told we're not correct. We're told we can't feel certain things. We can't think certain things. We can't act certain things. Ironically, when you allow children to be, those impulses are understood. They're processed. They are emoted. They are allowed. So they're not beneath the surface, and they're in that dark, mucky space, creating behaviors that we don't understand unconsciously. When you allow a child to be, and you love them through it, and you guide them through it, and you give good, healthy boundaries, what you do is you allow them to feel accepting and strong and trusting. They trust the body, they trust the mind, they use it as a source of wisdom. They learn to use their body and mind as a source of wisdom because they learn to listen to it rather than reject it. Imagine if you learn to listen to your body rather than reject it. Imagine if you learn to listen to your mind objectively and compassionately instead of rejecting it or compartmentalizing it. So I believe that healing is truly about healing the separation. It's looking within, it's taking full responsibility, It's being willing to take a good look in the mirror and unpackage your story. It's being willing to learn to listen to your mind and body in the moment, just to observe it for what it is. Just to allow your mind and body to act out its part in the moment. That will help you understand how you're perceiving the world. And then you can set about correcting that. You can set about aligning yourself with your deepest values, your deepest truth, your deepest heart. So rather than being unconsciously guided by things that have been neglected or compartmentalized or pushed away, by those attachments that we make, by attaching ideas and beliefs to danger and creating fear, rather than acting out these parts and separating ourselves automatically inside because we can't accept reality, we can't fully acknowledge reality. That's denial, that's projection, that's rationalization, that's all the things we do to not accept the present moment for what it is. We push it away, we do that within, well then we naturally do that without. We naturally separate ourselves from others, and you can see how that perpetuates throughout society. We are all acting out these parts that started early in our childhoods and became elaborated over time to varying degrees. And we've been telling this story of separation for thousands of years. Thousands of years. So for me, art has been a way that I've been able to work through a lot of that separation. My career as a psychologist has allowed me to work through a lot of that separation. My experiences with plant medicine, which I'm going to elaborate on in the future, have been a significant part of unraveling that story and looking beneath the surface and working through that separation and looking people in the eyes and seeing the divinity within, truly looking people in the eyes and recognizing that there is no separation, that they have a story and I have a story and we all have a story, and all that story is the gift that is this life, and it's the gift of learning, it's the gift of teaching. We need that story in a way to help us gain wisdom. But it's working through that story, it's unraveling it, it's being willing to see it, it's being willing to look within. That is such a profound act of healing. So you can look within in the present moment. You can learn to listen to what's happening in your body and mind, and you can simply learn to accept it for what it is, and that you don't necessarily need to act it out. You can simply listen to it and observe it and be curious about it. That takes tolerating a lot of emotion. That takes tolerating those impulses that make you want to act. You just want to act out those impulses. So that's where you got to learn to breathe, and you got to learn to slow down, and you got to learn to listen to yourself and be compassionate to yourself and allow your mind and body to act out what they're doing. Don't push it away like you always do. That's the denial thing.
Dada, I love cookies.
Okay, sweetheart. We got Alice here. So if you want to heal our country, if you want to help people, if you want your voice to be heard, take a good look within. Start looking within. Start really understanding how you see the world and how you operate in the moment and the story you've been telling yourselves. Start to look deep within to when that story of separation started to take place. Look at when you started to adapt your mind and body, to warp your mind and body to survive in the environment that you were in. And you suppressed your true self. You lost your true self. You lost that wild man or woman beneath the surface. That strong, clear, expansive, insightful, creative person that you truly are beneath it all. That I believe we all are. I believe we're all capable of so much more than we are showing as a human culture. We're acting out our injuries. We're acting out our fears. We're telling ourselves these stories over and over and over again, individually, and by extension, collectively. We're one breath away from true healing. As a human culture, we're one breath away from true healing. So I think that's a good way to end it today. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, episode 16. Have a wonderful day out there. Take care.